Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Well, interesting that the next part of Parsha Sh'mini. Welcome, David. I'm so glad you could join us this morning. It was very last minute.
No worries.
Thank you. So I was just about to explain that the Parsha Sh'mini is divided into two basic parts. That first part, which we just concluded, has to do with the induction of Aaron and his sons into the priesthood, the purification of the tabernacle. In other words, the whole transition to a point where the Jewish people, the Israelites, could serve God in this very unique kind of way, which had many, many implications, including one involving immortality, I'm pretty certain. The second half of the Parsha deals with the laws of kashrut. Very interesting. And our classic way of interpreting these things is that there's a significance to proximity. In other words, it's no coincidence that the Torah puts those animals that are considered pure and that may be consumed by us, as opposed to those animals which we cannot consume, right next to the dedication of the tabernacle and Aaron and his sons. And certainly something that they have in common is that they all involve a good deal of being quite meticulous. The animals brought on the altar were the animals that are considered to be kosher for the Israelites. In other words, we are only allowed to eat cattle, sheep, and goats as far as mammals are concerned, creatures. We see that the vast number of animals are actually forbidden for our consumption. But there's that connection still between what we can eat and what was actually offered up on the altar. And this is another connecting link between our tables, where we sit and eat every day, and the altar that was there in the tabernacle. However, God understands human frailty. God understands human appetite. And so for essentially any ungulate, and by that I mean an animal that has split hooves and chews the cud, that's the definition, is acceptable as a kosher animal, meaning that we are allowed to eat venison and deer, because those are the other ungulates. Those would never be offered up on the altar, but nevertheless, they're permitted for human consumption. They all require laws that allow the blood of the animal to be removed as much as possible. And there's another connecting link, of course, because we know this is a matter of respect in the fact that blood was used as an atonement symbol in the temple. And the fact that we're not allowed to consume that kind of blood, the dam hanefesh is what it's called, was part of that connection. It's saying that's only for use for divine worship. We cannot use it for our own purpose, for our own sense. So there are certainly connecting links between this portion that deals with those animals that are permissible. When it comes to birds, interestingly enough, there were two types of birds that were offered in the sanctuary. There were kind of a pigeon and doves. These all have to be defined in the Talmud. The oral tradition explains these things. In fact, there are many laws that involve kashrut and shchita, basically how those larger animals are to be slaughtered, and there are very strict rules involving that. Even laws that involve the health of the animal. So, for example, the lungs have to be examined very carefully. I've mentioned this before in previous lessons, that there's a person called a bodek, a checker, who after the animal is properly slaughtered, and if it is not properly slaughtered, it may not be consumed by Israelites, by Jews. But he goes in and checks the lungs. He feels the lungs of the animal to make sure there are no sirchot, no adhesions, because the assumption is that there are certain adhesions which would render the animal dead within a year, and there are other adhesions which are not considered. So there's a high level of specialization there, and of course the animal itself has to be examined very carefully to make sure it's not injured, and that those injuries might cause it to die within the space of a year. These are all ancient traditions here. And of course, such animals could never be offered up on the altar. So I was mentioning birds. The birds are listed as to exactly what birds are forbidden. And because, as someone has noted, because those birds are actually listed, the assumption, that is the birds that are not permissible, it turns out then that most birds are actually permissible for human consumption. And there are even certain types of insects. By and large, insects are considered absolutely forbidden, but there are certain specific species of locusts that are actually permissible for human consumption. And my understanding is, although as Ashkenazic Jews, we're not familiar with any of these things, we don't see any canned locusts that have a kosher symbol on them. There are certain Sephardic communities that have kept that tradition alive, and where they are actually able to eat those particular species. I don't know if they come chocolate covered, but regardless, that is part of the tradition. And those are the things that are going to be mentioned today. There's certainly a connection between appropriate to be eaten and whether or not those animals, in consuming those animals, we become defiled. We become spiritually impure. But there's an interesting connection there, and that's really occurred to me, that these laws of spiritual impurity and purity have a great connection to the issue of immortality and truly what our significance is here in the world. And if I may preach for a moment on this, if I'm not preaching already, I think what has happened is that our technology has advanced so much to the extent that we see the value of the individual and we consider ourselves as individuals so significant. And of course, at the same time, there's basically been a denial of our mortality and a lessening of how important that particular factor is in raising the question of how significant our lives are. We almost feel like we're going to live forever. That is the way we live our lives, as if we're going to live forever. And when you have a lot of something, we all know that human nature is such that one tends to squander it. So that in some ironic ways, that even though we know that every single human being is considered created in a divine image, that doesn't mean that we worship ourselves. We don't. We still recognize that we're mortals and in the presence of a great, beyond measure, beyond description existence. One existed, transcendent, divine creator, and to recognize what's involved in that. And in some ways, I think that, our modern lifestyle, there's so much that's absolutely wonderful about it. But instead of seeing our technological advances that our ancestors never would have believed possible, they never would have believed that any human being could set foot on the moon, right? Or our space exploration. I mean, if anything, these things should have us admire and worship the one that made us capable of these things. We didn't make ourselves capable, not initially. We didn't give ourselves the brain power that we have. What happened is that we were fortunate that there were many, many wonderful, creative, brilliant human beings that taught us things that we were capable of absorbing and even processing. And that the one who made those beings, the ones who gave life, right? Just reading very recently, this very important book, I think, Heschel's Between God and Man, where he talks about, we talk about some people who describe God in anthropomorphic terms, meaning giving God a body, describing God bodily. And We have others who describe God anthropopathically. I had to look that word up, and it essentially means ascribing to God feelings and emotions. And Heschel mentions that, like in the Greek system, in the ancient Greek system, gods were jealous, gods got angry, etc. That has to do with pathos, feeling, right? And Heschel suggests, he creates a new word, and he says, if anything, our tradition, the Jewish tradition, describes God anthropneumatically. Pneumatically is from a word pneuma, which is a Greek Stoic philosophical term that tries to describe the essential and vital force within each of us. That is the essential living force. You might call it our soul or our life essence. Or I would say, Heschel doesn't say this, trying to describe what exactly is it to be conscious. What is the nature of our consciousness? And therefore to see God as the sole essence of all reality, and to understand this way in which Heschel, in such wonderful and brilliant ways, tries to help us understand what is it to believe in God. So, interestingly, of course, now we get back to these issues of kashrut. And I think the genius of Judaism and the Torah is that it tries to actually not just look at this from an emotional or intellectual perspective, but to drill all the way down to our behavior, to make sure that our behavior is such as to represent divine service. And that this attitude of appreciation, right? To not just state words of it, although those are important because they help govern our thinking, but to act, right? To act as the way that you appreciate this divine one. And so these laws of kashrut are not old, ancient, atavistic ways of behavior. They're profound ways in which we make sure that even what we consume, that what we put on our table and what we eat in order to survive. And not only that, of course, we know that eating is a very comforting and enjoyable activity, that be in service of our divine creator. That we're able to, and that gives our lives the significance that we seek. So with all that introduction, let me see what we can do in looking at the text itself. So let me go into the screen share. I believe this is it. Yes. Chapter 11. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron lemor alehem. Right? And God, the Lord Hashem, spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them. Now, just to review this, when it says he spoke to Aaron, he actually didn't speak to Aaron, but he only spoke to Moses. But nevertheless, Aaron was the first one Moses informed about the laws that he'd received through his divine inspiration. After all, we read elsewhere how Moses' revelation of the divine was unique, sui generis. And so we can't say that God spoke to Aaron in the same kind of way. There's enough support for us to understand that. So why is Aaron mentioned? And this is based on very early commentaries, and that is to give him honor, to pay him a respect that he deserves, that even though he may not have heard God speaking, except in those rare moments, like right after the death of his son, it talks about God speaking to Aaron and doesn't mention Moses. So in that case, we have to say, at that point, Aaron received revelation. But in this particular case, the fact that Aaron listened to Moses, paid attention to Moses, and did what Moses told him to do in the name of Hashem was tantamount to his hearing Hashem directly. And that's actually a significant message that even though we don't have prophecy that's the way it's described in the Bible, and certainly not the kind of prophecy that Moses had, nevertheless, when we turn to the words of the Torah and when we turn to the words of the Bible, it is divine revelation. It is. Because what's really important isn't so much the act, but the activity. And what's so important is how we respond. It isn't a magic trick. It isn't simply another experience. It's the fact that it gives us this conduit, which is the nature of prophecy, this conduit to the divine. If we choose to take it seriously enough, Aaron did, and so consequently, it's the Torah speaks of him as if God spoke to him directly. Okay, we'll do the best we can with all of this. Dabru el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, Lamor, saying, in other words, quote, as Rabbi Dr. Pamela Barmesh likes to say, quote, Zot hachaya, these are the animals, asher tuchlu, which you may eat, which you may consume. Mikol habeima, so it starts off with as far as those animals which are cattle, asher al haaretz, which are over the face of the earth, right, which are on the earth. So of all the cattle that exist, of all the domesticated creatures, mammals, these we may eat. So Dabru el bnei Israel, Rashi, right? Speak to the children of Israel. El kulam hishva liyot shluchim bedibur zeh. So it says, all of them he equated, right, to be emissaries, messengers regarding this speech, right, this statement. The fi shehushvu, okay, because they were equated, demima, because they all were equated. Demima, I think, would be in silence. Vekiblu alehem, zerat hamakom ba'ava. So I'll finish the translation. They regarding in silence, and they accepted upon themselves this edict, this divine edict, Zerat HaMakom, Ba'ava, with love. Now, this Rashi isn't exactly hard to, it's an interesting Rashi, because how do we understand this Rashi? Because it says, Dabru el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel. And it says he equated all of them to be emissaries by Dibur Zeh. Okay. So when he says kulam, does he refer here to Moses, the fact that it says Moses and Aaron? What's interesting is, though, it doesn't say Moshe v'Aaron. That is the key phrase, the catchphrase that's going to be interpreted. It doesn't say Vaydaber el Moshe ve'el Aaron. It says to the children of Israel. So in what sense were the children of Israel, if in fact this is referring, when it says kulam, all of them, and kulam would seem to refer back to, right, Bnei Yisrael. Does it mean that all the Jewish people are considered to be God's emissaries with regards to this instruction? And because it sounds so much like, we know for a fact that it says that when Aaron's sons died, Aaron was silent. Vayidom, there's the root. The Vayidom Aaron. Aaron was silent. And Kiblu Alehem, again, it doesn't mention that Moses was silent, it just mentions that Aaron was silent. And of course, we can assume that his sons were also silent. And it makes sense. This whole statement, in a way, makes sense if we say that Rashi is really pointing out why this starts off with spoke to Moses and Aaron, because this is what happens. This commandment comes after that whole incident of the death of Nadav and Avihu. And so it seems to, it certainly is easy to understand it then, that Aaron was also therefore instructed to instruct the Jewish people. So maybe I have to go back and say dabru, which is plural. In other words, it doesn't say daber, which would definitely mean he only spoke to Moses. This is plural. And so I'm tending, as I'm equivocating over how to understand this sentence, I'm starting to lean on the understanding that what Rashi, when he says kulam, all of them, is actually referring to the fact that it's this plural verb, you all of you, meaning you and Moses, you, Aaron, and Moses should speak to the children of Israel. And that makes a lot more sense now. Now it's starting to make sense that he equated, even though it should have said, again, clarification, had it said, Echnehem Ishva, if it said the two of them, he equated, instead of the word kulam, which means all of them, which certainly sounds like more than just both of them. And since he could have said it in a way that was very clear that it was talking just about Moses and Aaron, and doesn't say that, again, now I have to lean to the other side, which is to say that he really is talking about all of the Jewish people. But now I have another problem, because what I can understand if it's simply telling us that there was a tradition that they were all silent in accepting God's decree, and I'm assuming that the Gzeirat HaMakom, again, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the death of Nadav and Avihu, the divine edict? Or are we talking about the fact that the laws of kashrut could also be considered a gzeirah, right? An edict. And the term, though, that we would generally use for a law that isn't necessarily a rational law, right? Is simply a divine decree, and we call it a chok, right? But Rashi doesn't use the term chok. So I don't know if this sentence is intentionally ambiguous, and whether he is saying that again. But the problem that I have, okay, my major problem with this sentence, and I hope you are enjoying the wrestling that I'm going through in trying to understand this Rashi. I hope it is giving you some pleasure, because believe it or not, I find this pleasurable. Pondering the meaning of these words, this word shluchim, it makes, okay, Moses and Aaron were clearly God's messengers telling the Jewish people these laws. In what sense, though, are the Jewish people God's messengers in this particular commandment, right? And again, b'dibur zeh, it makes sense to talk about Moses and Aaron being God's messengers in delivering this specific commandment to the Jewish people. But I struggle to understand in what sense are the Jewish people God's messengers in practicing this commandment or speaking about it. And so I'm left with an uncertainty and trying to lean in one way, and I'm back now to leaning that Rashi is referring to Moses and Aaron. Now, I imagine, okay, that there will be an answer, that at some point I will come across an answer to resolve this particular sentence and what Rashi meant by this. And I actually have some ideas of where to go to get a clarification on that. Of course, there's always the possibility that I won't agree with that clarification. But at any rate, it's just part of the exercise of studying Torah in this way. And with this strange way, I'm going to stop today's lesson with the hope that perhaps with God's blessing, we will continue this next time. And without making promises, if I have an opportunity, perhaps this coming Monday, to discuss this and possibly tell you if I found a resolution. And with this, I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Not your typical lesson. Any comments before I stop the recording? Anybody want to go on record? Okay.